The Rich Neighbor and the Honest Husband, a tale of love, temptation, and redemption. In a quiet village nestled between rolling green hills, there lived a man of modest means, yet rich in spirit. This man, whose name was Elias, had never been known to complain of his station in life. His cottage, though humble and worn by the years, stood firmly against the passing seasons. Its walls, faded and cracked, told the story of a man who had worked long and hard in the fields from the day of his youth. And though his clothes were patched and threadbare, they were always clean, as if to reflect the quiet dignity that Elias held in his heart. But more than the house or the clothes, what made Elias rich in ways far beyond gold was his wife, Miriam. Miriam was a woman of such beauty that even the brightest morning sun could not compete with the glow of her presence. Her face was soft, her eyes sparkled like the clearest water in the river, and her smile could warm the coldest of hearts. Yet, despite her beauty, Miriam carried no pride. She loved Elias as much as he loved her, and they lived a life together that was filled with peace and mutual respect. It was in the evenings, after long days spent toiling under the sun, that Elias would sit beside his wife by the hearth. With his hands rough from labor, he would hold hers, and they would speak of their day. "You are my treasure, Miriam," he would say, his eyes filled with a love so deep that it could not be measured by wealth. "For you, I would climb the tallest mountain, swim the widest sea, and work the hardest soil, just to see you happy." And Miriam would laugh softly, the sound of it like the gentle rustling of leaves on a quiet autumn day. But in the very same village where Elias and Miriam lived, there was another man, a man who possessed everything that Elias did not. His name was Mr. Alistair Greaves, and his wealth was spoken of in every corner of the village. His house, grand and imposing, stood at the highest point of the hill, overlooking the humble homes of those who lived below. His clothes were of the finest fabric, his meals were feasts fit for kings, and he wanted for nothing, except, as it turned out, the one thing he could not have: Miriam. For Mr. Greaves, with all his riches, had looked upon Elias's wife with envy. "How can a woman of such beauty belong to a poor man?" he would often mutter to himself. His wealth and power had always allowed him to have what he desired, but in Miriam he saw something he could not easily buy. The more he saw her, the more he wanted her for himself, and so he hatched a plan. One day, when Elias had left for the fields, Mr. Greaves came to the poor man's house. He knocked on the weathered wooden door, and when Miriam answered, he smiled in a way that made her feel uneasy. "Good day, my dear," he said smoothly, his voice as sweet as honey but as dangerous as a snake's hiss. "You are truly a vision, a flower that blooms amidst the dust." "But why," he continued, his eyes scanning her simple dress, "why does your husband not adorn you with the finest clothes? Surely a woman of your beauty deserves silks, velvets, and jewels." Miriam, who had never once thought herself lacking, was taken aback by his words. "My husband loves me," she replied, her voice firm though her heart now held a seed of doubt. "We may not have riches, but he cares for me deeply." "But love alone does not clothe you in finery," Mr. Greaves said with a sly grin. "Love should give you more. Leave him, dear lady, and I shall give you everything you deserve. I will buy you the finest dresses, gold jewelry, and you shall be the envy of all women in the land." Miriam hesitated. Though she knew her husband loved her, the words of Mr. Greaves echoed in her mind. That evening, as Elias returned home after another long day in the fields, Miriam could not help but look at him differently. His clothes were worn, his hands calloused, and his face weathered by the sun. She loved him, yes, but suddenly she began to wonder if love alone was enough. As the days passed, Mr. Greaves did not relent. Every time Elias left for work, the rich man would come to Miriam with more promises. "You are too beautiful to live this life of poverty," he would say. "You deserve better." And so Miriam's thoughts grew troubled. She began to wonder why her husband did not buy her fine things. "Perhaps he does not love me enough," she thought one night as she lay awake beside Elias. "If he truly loved me, would he not want to give me the best?" One evening, unable to hold back her thoughts any longer, Miriam turned to Elias and spoke. "Husband," she said, "look at me. My clothes are old and worn. I am your wife, and yet I do not have the beautiful things that other women have. Do you not love me?" Elias, who had always seen his wife as the most precious jewel in the world, was taken aback by her words. "My dearest Miriam," he replied, "you are the light of my life. What need have we of fine clothes when we have each other?" But Miriam was not satisfied. "If you truly loved me," she insisted, "you would buy me a new dress, something beautiful, something that shows you care." Elias was deeply troubled by this. He had always thought that love was enough, but now, seeing the sorrow in his wife's eyes, he began to doubt himself. The next day, despite having little money, he went to the market and bought the finest dress he could afford. It was not silk, nor was it velvet, but it was new, and Elias hoped it would make Miriam happy. When he returned home and gave the dress to his wife, Miriam smiled and embraced him. "Thank you, my dear husband," she said. "Now I know that you love me." But even as she spoke the words, there was a small voice in the back of her mind that wondered if there was still something more she deserved. Mr. Greaves, upon seeing Miriam in her new dress, did not give up. "A fine dress, yes," he said when he saw her again, "but where is the gold? Where are the jewels that a woman of your beauty should wear?" Miriam, though pleased with the new dress, now found herself caught in a storm of dissatisfaction. Mr. Greaves' words lingered in her mind like a shadow that would not lift. Each day, as she wore the dress her husband had so lovingly bought for her, she couldn't help but feel that something was missing. The dress was fine, yes, but her neighbor's comments about gold and jewels had planted a seed of doubt in her heart. A week later, Mr. Greaves appeared again, as persistent as ever, and with a glint of triumph in his eyes. "Ah, you are more radiant than the moon in that dress," he said with a smile that stretched too wide, his gaze lingering on her. "But beauty such as yours deserves more. Your husband has given you a dress, but has he given you the gold that reflects your worth? See here," he said, pulling a small wooden box from the folds of his cloak. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was the most exquisite necklace Miriam had ever seen. The chain shimmered like liquid gold, and it was adorned with gems that sparkled as if stars had fallen from the heavens. Miriam gasped. She had never seen anything so beautiful in her life. "This, my dear, is what you deserve. Leave your husband," he whispered, his voice soft and tempting like a lullaby. "And all of this, every bit of it, will be yours." For a moment, Miriam could not speak. The jewels shone so brightly, as though they were speaking directly to her heart, calling her away from the simple life she shared with Elias. But something deep within her stirred, something she had almost forgotten: love. "No," she finally said, shaking her head. "My husband loves me, and I love him. Go away, I will not listen to your words any longer." Mr. Greaves' smile faltered, but he was not one to give up easily. He left without another word, but he returned every day, bringing more promises and showing her more riches. Slowly, Miriam began to waver. As she lay awake at night, beside her husband who snored softly in his sleep, she found herself wondering why he could not give her what Mr. Greaves promised. Each morning, Elias went out into the fields to work, his hands growing harder and his back more bent with each passing day. And each afternoon, Mr. Greaves came to her door, his voice like a psalm, promising her a life of luxury. One evening, as Elias returned from the fields, he found Miriam sitting by the fire, her face drawn with sadness. "Wife," he said, kneeling beside her, "what troubles you?" Miriam did not look at him. "Do you truly love me?" she asked quietly. Elias was taken aback. "Of course I love you," he said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "You are the most precious thing in the world to me." "Then why," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why do you not give me gold? If you loved me as much as you say, you would give me jewels. You would make me feel as though I am the most beautiful woman in the world." Elias's heart sank. He had worked so hard to make her happy, but now it seemed that all his efforts were not enough. "Miriam," he said, his voice soft but firm, "I do not have gold to give you. I gave you a new dress, the best I could afford. Is that not enough?" Miriam said nothing. Her silence was more painful than any words she could have spoken. Elias stood, feeling the weight of her sadness pressing down on him. He knew that no matter how hard he worked, he could never compete with the riches that Mr. Greaves could offer. The next morning, Elias rose before the sun, his heart heavy with the knowledge that he was failing his wife. He went to the field, but his mind was not on his work. As he toiled moving stones and tilling the earth, he whispered a prayer under his breath. "O Lord," he said, looking up to the sky, "I love my wife more than anything, but I cannot give her the riches she desires. Please help me. Show me a way to keep her love." As the hours passed, the sun climbed higher in the sky, beating down on Elias's weary back. He worked harder than he ever had before, but no matter how much he toiled, the stones in the field seemed never-ending. In the afternoon, as he sat under a tree to rest, he saw a man approaching. The stranger's appearance was unlike any Elias had seen before. He wore a robe of deep green, and his face was framed by a long, silver beard that shimmered in the light. "Good day, my friend," the man said, his voice calm and wise. "You seem troubled. What weighs on your heart?" Elias, not one to confide in strangers, found himself telling the man everything. His love for his wife, her growing discontent, and the rich neighbor's attempts to woo her away. The stranger listened in silence, his eyes gleaming with understanding. When Elias had finished, the man smiled kindly. "Fear not, good sir. I have something that may help you." From within his robe, the man produced 2 slender sticks, each no longer than a forearm. "These," the stranger said, "are no ordinary sticks. With the first, you can turn any person into a donkey, and with the second, you can return them to their human form. But be wise, for such power is not to be used lightly." Elias stared at the sticks, bewildered. "A donkey," he repeated, unsure whether to believe the stranger's words. "Yes," the man said, his eyes twinkling. "A donkey, but use them carefully. It is not only the spell that is powerful, but the lesson it teaches." Elias, still uncertain, accepted the sticks. "Thank you," he said quietly, though his heart was heavy with doubt. "But how will this help me win back my wife?" "Love is a powerful thing," the man replied, his voice fading as he turned to leave. "Sometimes it is not what we give, but what we show. You will see in time." That evening, when Elias returned home, he found Miriam once again seated by the fire, her face shadowed with doubt. But this time Elias was ready. "Miriam," he said, his voice steady and strong, "I have a gift for you." Miriam looked up, her curiosity piqued. "A gift?" "Yes," Elias said, holding up the first stick. "I have prayed for a miracle, and now I can give you something greater than gold. Watch." Before Miriam could ask what he meant, Elias gently touched her with the stick. In an instant, her form shimmered and changed, and where his wife had stood, there now stood a donkey. Miriam, now in the form of a donkey, let out a bray of confusion. She lifted her head and tried to speak, but all that escaped her lips was a loud, "Hee-haw!" Elias, watching her with a mix of sorrow and determination, picked up the second stick and touched her again. Instantly, she was restored to her human form. Miriam gasped, looking down at herself in shock. What? What happened? She stammered. It was a miracle, Elias said softly, and it was a reminder that our love is worth more than anything gold can buy. I prayed for this, and now I see that love does not need jewels or riches, it needs only trust. Miriam's eyes filled with tears as she embraced her husband. Oh, Elias, she whispered, I have been a fool. I allowed the words of a greedy man to cloud my heart, but now I see the truth. You love me, and that is all I need. Elias held Miriam close, feeling the weight of her apology settle in his heart like a gentle rain after a long drought. He stroked her hair, his rough, calloused fingers tenderly brushing her cheek. There is nothing to forgive, Miriam, he whispered, his voice low and filled with relief. We have both been led astray, by the lure of riches, by the whispers of temptation. But now we see clearly. Love is not measured by the weight of gold, but by the strength of the heart. For a moment, they stood there in the quiet warmth of their small, humble home, the fire crackling softly in the hearth, casting a gentle glow upon their faces. Outside, the sun was beginning to set, its last rays bathing the world in a golden light that seemed to shimmer with a new sense of hope. Yet, as serene as this moment was, Elias knew that the trouble was not entirely behind them. The rich neighbor, Mr. Greaves, would not give up so easily. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept through the window, Elias woke early and prepared for his day. He had not forgotten the second task that lay before him, punishing the man who had tried so cunningly to steal his wife's heart. With the two magical sticks tucked safely into his coat, he kissed Miriam on the forehead before quietly leaving the house. Mr. Greaves, in all his arrogance, was certain of his eventual victory. He believed that his wealth, charm, and persistence would soon sway Miriam completely. So when he arrived at the poor couple's cottage later that morning, he was met with a surprise. Miriam greeted him at the door with a new air of confidence, her gaze steady and unwavering. Mr. Greaves, she said coolly, you may have charmed me once, but your schemes will no longer work here. My husband is worth more than all your riches combined, and I see that now. Mr. Greaves, startled by her defiance, attempted to recover. He smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. Oh, my dear, he purred, don't be hasty. Surely you don't mean to reject all that I can offer you. Comfort, luxury, and... But before he could finish, Miriam raised her hand, and in it she held one of the magical sticks. Without a word, she reached out and touched Mr. Greaves lightly on the shoulder. In an instant, the transformation began. His polished boots, his fine velvet cloak, his perfectly combed hair, all vanished as his form twisted and contorted. In mere moments, where once stood the rich and handsome Mr. Greaves, there now stood a donkey. His wide, astonished eyes blinked rapidly, and he let out a loud, indignant bray. Hee-haw! Miriam couldn't help but laugh softly, a sound filled not with malice, but with the simple joy of justice served. She gently led the donkey out of the cottage, down the dirt path, and into the fields where Elias was already hard at work. Elias, upon seeing the donkey approach, wiped the sweat from his brow and smiled. Ah, he said, so it seems the rich man has finally come to help with the work. The donkey, which was now Mr. Greaves, stood bewildered in the middle of the field, his once proud head now lowered in humiliation. Elias wasted no time. He placed a heavy sack of stones on the donkey's back and led him toward the far end of the field, where the hard laborer waited. You'll find, Elias said with a chuckle, that there is more to life than riches and gold. Perhaps a few days of honest work will teach you what true value is. And so it was that Mr. Greaves, who had once known nothing but the ease and comfort of his wealth, found himself burdened with the back-breaking toil of a simple laborer. Day after day, Elias loaded him with stones, sacks of grain, and other heavy burdens, and the donkey trudged wearily through the fields, carrying load after load. It was a humbling experience, to say the least, for the once proud man. As the days turned into weeks, the poor man's life began to improve. With the help of his new donkey, Elias was able to clear the fields of stones much faster than before. He began to sell more crops at the market, and slowly but surely, his fortunes began to rise. He was no longer the poorest man in the village. His hard work, combined with the magical assistance of the donkey, allowed him to provide more for his wife than ever before. Though his wealth grew, Elias never forgot the lessons he had learned. He remained humble, generous, and devoted to Miriam. As for the donkey, it worked tirelessly, its once proud spirit broken by the relentless labor. The other villagers would sometimes stop and watch in wonder as the strange donkey, with its almost human-like eyes, carried stones and heavy loads without complaint. Rumors began to spread about the mysterious transformation, though no one could ever quite believe that Mr. Greaves, the wealthy and arrogant man from the hill, had truly been turned into a beast of burden. One day, after several years had passed, Elias stood in the field watching the donkey struggle under the weight of yet another sack of grain. The creature had grown old and weary, its back bent, and its steps slow. Elias felt a pang of pity in his heart. Though Mr. Greaves had wronged him, he had served his punishment, and Elias, being a man of mercy, knew that it was time to end the enchantment. He went to the house and fetched the second magical stick, the one that would reverse the spell. He approached the donkey, who now stood motionless, its tired head hanging low. With a gentle hand, Elias touched the animal with the second stick, and in an instant, the transformation was undone. Before him stood Mr. Greaves once more, though he was not the same man who had once boasted of his wealth and power. His once handsome face was now lined with age, his back bent from the years of labor, and his eyes no longer gleamed with arrogance. Instead, they were filled with weariness and regret. "You tried to take what was not yours," Elias said, his voice calm but firm. "You sought to buy love with gold and riches, but love is not for sale. You have served your punishment, and now you are free. But remember this: never again should you seek to take from another what does not belong to you." Mr. Greaves lived a quiet, solitary life. He never again sought the company of others, nor did he try to woo another man's wife. His wealth, once his pride and joy, now felt like a burden to him. He had learned, too late, that true wealth was not measured in gold, but in the love and loyalty of those around him. As for Elias and Miriam, they continued to live happily together, their love stronger than ever. Though they now had more wealth than before, they never let it change their humble hearts. They remained content with the simple pleasures of life: each other's company, the beauty of the land, and the peace of a clear conscience. The story of the rich man turned donkey became a legend in the village, told by parents to their children as a lesson in humility, love, and the dangers of greed. And so, Elias and Miriam lived out their days in joy and contentment, their love a testament to the power of loyalty and trust, far more valuable than all the gold in the world.